Tonight, a Larry Barker investigation. It ranks among New Mexico's most shocking murders, yet it's a case you have probably never heard about.
A frail 87-year-old businessman is ruthlessly murdered inside his Santa Fe home. After a lengthy investigation, detectives name a suspect and a motive. That was 12 years ago.
So why wasn't this case prosecuted? The district attorney lost the file. Here's Larry's report, Justice for Walter.
What do you believe the motive was for murder?
Pure greed.
Nobody in your office has reviewed the case file. Why is that justice?
You've got a murderer that is running out on the loose, and has gotten away with it for 12 years.
87-year-old Walter Donlin was a wealthy retired educator. In October 2005, an employee, Marvin Cidabaca, reported an emergency at Donlin's Santa Fe home.
Santa Fe 911.
Hi, we need an ambulance.
Okay, what's the problem?
Walter's 88 years old and he fell and he cracked his head.
What caused the fall?
We don't know, we weren't here.
You said he cracked his head open?
Yeah, right on the front.
Cidabaca later claimed Donlin fell in his study and hit his head on the TV. Bleeding and unconscious, the elderly homeowner was rushed to the ER. John Borth is a Santa Fe police detective.
While he was on the hospital bed being sutured and stapled for injuries to the top of his scalp, he woke up and said, "They beat me," and they asked him, "Who beat you?" And he just said again, "They beat me." And after that, he lost consciousness again and never regained consciousness.
10 days later, Walter Donlin died from his injuries.
Was it a household accident or something else? Detectives launched a sweeping 2-year investigation, amassing boxes of financial records, a room full of physical evidence, and a detailed forensic analysis. The conclusion? Walter Donlin's death was no accident.
Almost from the beginning, detectives were suspicious of the claim that Walter injured himself in a fall. Santa Fe Police Detective Tony Trujillo was assigned to the Donlin case.
Was this an accidental fall, or was it, something else?
Marvin Cidabaca told detectives Walter had apparently been sitting in his chair when he stood up, fell, and hit his head.
Were the results of the autopsy consistent with the victim here hitting his head on a TV set?
Absolutely not. He had a linear skull fracture. There were 3 lacerations to the top of his head.
There's absolutely no way this was an accident.
State Police investigator Paul Chavez was called in to analyze the crime scene. Among his findings, no blood on or near the TV. The facts revealed Walter Donlin was savagely assaulted.
Mr. Donlin, without a doubt, was beaten to death in his home.
The findings of the analysis was that Walter was seated in his chair at the time the blows were delivered to his head, which subsequently killed him.
Walter Donlin was murdered.
Walter Donlin was murdered, yes.
Who would brutally murder a frail, elderly man sitting in his chair? Walter and his 94-year-old wife, Teresa, had accumulated a net worth valued at about $10 million from investments and rental properties.
Shortly after Walter died, investigators discovered suspicious transactions involving the Donlin financial accounts. A team of state accounting specialists were called in to analyze the Donlin bank and investment records. Their findings? Someone had been stealing large amounts of money from Walter and Teresa, and the primary suspect was Marvin Cidabaca.
Cidabaca was the Donlin's property manager and the same man who called 911 claiming Walter had fallen in a household accident.
There was an extensive history over possibly a 20-year time span of Marvin Cidabaca embezzling funds from the Donlin's bank accounts as well as investment accounts. Marvin Cidabaca was funneling money out of the Donlin banking and investment accounts and putting it into his own accounts.
And roughly how much money are we talking about?
Hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million. It was a lot of money.
Armed with a mountain of evidence that included the financial audit, crime scene analysis, witness statements, and search warrants, detectives named a murder suspect, Marvin C. DeBaca.
Based on the evidence in this case, put it all together for me, Tony. Tell me what happened.
Marvin C. DeBaca made a career out of skimming, embezzling, whatever word you want to label it. He made a career of taking money from the Donlins. It got to a point where his luck ran out in that Walter found out he was doing this. Walter was going to fire him because of it. Marvin C. DeBaca saw his cash cow walking out the door, and he was not going to let that happen. And I think what happened was Walter had to die. I have no doubt about that.
Detectives turned their 2-year investigation over to the Santa Fe DA for prosecution. However, days before the case was scheduled to be heard by a grand jury, the proceeding was postponed due to a family emergency in the DA's office. That was in 2007. The case was never rescheduled.
Over the course of the next 12 years, the case would be shuffled from prosecutor to prosecutor. Eventually, the file disappeared, and a succession of DAs lost track of Walter Donlin's murder case. Jennifer Paget Macias was DA in 2016.
Were you aware of the Walter Donlin murder case?
It was never brought to my attention, no.
Did anybody on your staff bring this murder case to your attention while you were DA?
No.
I can tell you, my office doesn't have the case file.
Marco Cerna is Santa Fe's current DA. He says the murder is an open case.
We are still looking at this case.
Well, you're not still looking at the case. You haven't even read it. Nobody in your office has read that case file. It's been 2 years.
We did receive a thorough briefing from Santa Fe.
But you haven't reviewed the case file, have you?
I have never received a case file from Santa Fe PD.
Well, you've been in office for 2 years. Why not?
I've never received the case file.
Steve Settle is a retired career prosecutor.
If the DA loses the case file, what work can they do on that case?
Well, none. I mean, all the witness statements are in it and the forensic reports, and in this case there must have been an autopsy. The answer is none.
Following this interview, the DA did finally retrieve a copy of the Donlin case file from Santa Fe Police. The matter is now under review. However, because of the 12-year delay, none of the financial crimes alleged in the investigation can be prosecuted due to the statute of limitations. In a 2007 news report, the primary suspect in this case, Marvin C. DeBaca, maintained his innocence, saying, quote, "I'm not guilty." Today, C. DeBaca lives in Rio Rancho, where he reportedly works as a handyman.
What do you want New Mexicans to know about this case?
That we have failed miserably. We have a true victim who was murdered, and the system has failed him.
Has justice been done in the case of Walter Donlin?
Not yet, but I'm hopeful.
You've been waiting how long?
12 years.
Larry Barker, KRQE, News 13.
Our coverage continues online. To hear the entire 911 call C. DeBaca made to police, visit krqe.com.